The night was warm, but the palace was cold. In the upper chambers of a fortress built not for children, a small boy slept beneath silken sheets that smelled faintly of rose water and iron. His breaths were shallow, uncertain, each one a fragile note in the symphony of a dynasty already collapsing under its own weight. Outside, the torches flickered against the marble walls, and footsteps, measured, deliberate, approached his door. The boy was a king, barely 9 years old, crowned not by destiny, but by convenience. Behind him lay a throne carved from centuries of blood and ambition. Before him, a future that his guardians would never let him see. History would remember his name, but not his voice. His reign would last only long enough for the grown men around him to whisper, to scheme, and finally, to decide that the easiest way to silence a crown was to still its breathing. When dawn came, the kingdom would awaken to mourn a tragedy disguised as mercy. The court poets would call it a peaceful death, but those who had heard the muffled cries knew better. This is the story of a child monarch, born into gold, buried in silence. If you're drawn to stories like this, tales where power devours innocence and history hides its cruelest truths, then stay with us. Subscribe, like, and follow for more real lives of the past, the ones history books tried to whisper away. Morning came with a quiet that felt unnatural, like the pause between lightning and thunder. The palace awoke under a sky pale as bone. Bells began to toll from the great cathedral, their sound rolling through the city in slow, mournful waves. People emerged from their homes and shops, drawn by the sound that meant only one thing: the king was dead. In the square, the announcer stood upon the marble steps, parchment in hand, his voice trembling as he read the words written for him. His Majesty, our beloved sovereign, passed peacefully in his sleep. The heavens have reclaimed their chosen son. The crowd gasped, some crossing themselves, others weeping into their hands. Mothers held their children closer, old men bowed their heads. For a brief, fragile moment, grief was genuine. They believed the words because they wanted to. The idea of a gentle death was easier to mourn than the truth. Inside the palace, that truth had already been buried beneath layers of ritual. The boy's body was displayed upon a bed of white lilies, his face serene beneath the veil, his hands folded upon his chest. Courtiers moved about the chamber in choreographed sorrow, their eyes carefully red-rimmed, their steps heavy with rehearsed reverence. The regent stood at the foot of the bed, silent, his expression unreadable. To the onlookers, he was a man carrying the unbearable weight of loss. Only he knew the true weight he bore. Priests chanted in low tones, their prayers rising like mist toward the gilded ceiling. The scent of incense thickened the air, masking the faint trace of oil and linen. Somewhere beyond the walls, carpenters prepared the coffin, gilded and carved with scenes of divine ascension. The entire kingdom moved as one body, performing an act of mourning it could not question. When the Queen Mother entered, veiled in black from crown to hem, the room stilled. She walked slowly toward the bed, her hands trembling just enough to be noticed. For a long time, she stood there, saying nothing. No one could see her eyes beneath the veil, but the silence around her spoke volumes. She reached out, her fingers brushing the fabric that covered her son's face. The regent took a step forward, perhaps to stop her, then froze. She turned her head slightly toward him. Her voice, when it came, was a whisper meant for him alone. "I know." It was not an accusation. Not yet. It was a statement, cold, absolute, inevitable. The regent bowed his head, his lips parting as if to speak, but no words followed. She turned away, and the moment passed like a shadow crossing a grave. Outside, the morning bells continued, echoing across the valley and over the frozen river. Somewhere in the distance, a child asked his mother why kings must die so young. She did not answer. She only stared at the sky, where the sun struggled to rise through a veil of clouds. Within the palace walls, the council convened once more. The throne stood empty, draped in black silk, its presence more powerful now than it had ever been when the boy sat upon it. The regent took his place beside it, his hand resting lightly on the armrest, as though to steady the kingdom through its grief. And for the first time in months, he smiled, small, fleeting, and entirely without joy. The funeral procession wound through the capital like a living river of black. Velvet banners hung heavy from the ramparts, each embroidered with the royal crest. The crown and the lily, symbols now rendered meaningless by the small coffin that passed beneath them. Snow fell lightly, soundless, turning the air into a haze of white, through which the cortege moved at a funereal crawl. The people lined the streets in silence. Some wept openly. Others simply stared, faces pale, hollow with disbelief. The coffin was small, heartbreakingly so, carried by 6 guards whose armor glinted dully beneath the gray sky. Their boots struck the cobblestones in perfect rhythm, a dirge made of footsteps. Behind them came the regent, cloaked in mourning silk, his head bowed with immaculate humility. The queen mother followed, veiled in deepest black, her gloved hands clasped before her as though in prayer. None could see that her nails cut faint crescents into her palms with each step she took. The cathedral awaited them, its doors thrown open, the interior thick with candlelight and the scent of myrrh. Choirs sang in voices so pure they seemed to belong to another world, one untouched by deceit. The boy's coffin was placed before the altar, the white lilies surrounding it like snow fallen from heaven. A priest approached, his hands trembling as he lifted his voice to speak of peace, eternity, divine will, words that, on another day, might have offered comfort. Today, they felt like a lie that had learned to wear sacred robes. As the ceremony unfolded, the regent kept his eyes fixed upon the coffin. His expression was a perfection of grief, composed, silent, almost saintly. Yet deep inside, beneath the mask, something stirred. Guilt, perhaps, or the ghost of fear. For though it sealed every door and silenced every witness, he could not quiet the thought that perhaps death does not end what guilt awakens. When the final hymn faded, the Queen Mother rose. Her movement drew every gaze in the cathedral. Slowly, deliberately, she stepped toward the coffin. The priest hesitated, uncertain whether to intervene, but the regent raised a hand to still them. She reached the dais, her veil brushing the flowers, and placed a single white rose atop the boy's folded hands. Then she leaned down and whispered something no one else could hear. Those nearest swore they saw her lips move in prayer. But the regent, watching from the shadows, knew she had not prayed. She had promised. That night, as the bells tolled once more across the city, the regent stood alone in his chamber. Before him, on the table, lay the royal seal, the weight of which had once felt like destiny and now felt only like iron. The candle beside it had nearly burned down, its wax dripping onto the parchment below. He read the decree he had written 100 times in his mind. The formation of a new regency, the continuation of the dynasty under his temporary stewardship. The ink glistened black as blood. Beyond his window, the city slept. Snow muffled every sound, every secret. Yet, somewhere within the depths of the palace, a door creaked softly, a sound small enough to be mistaken for wind, but clear enough to remind him that silence was never complete. He turned, suddenly cold, eyes fixed upon the empty chair beside the fire. For an instant, he thought he saw a shadow seated there, a small figure, pale and still, watching him with patient accusation. He blinked, and it was gone. Only the fire remained, hissing softly as though mocking his breath. He poured wine into a silver cup and raised it with trembling hands. "To peace," he whispered, his voice breaking around the word. But the air did not answer, and for the first time since the boy's death, the regent felt something he could not command, could not silence, could not bury. It was not fear of discovery. It was the unbearable weight of being haunted by innocence. Years passed, and time did what time always does. It covered blood with dust and memory with myth. The kingdom endured. The people, desperate to believe in continuity, accepted the tale written for them. A young monarch, saintly and frail, taken too soon by the will of heaven. The regent ruled in his stead, though no one called him king. He didn't need the title. Power had already learned his name. But power, like guilt, has an echo. It does not fade. It reverberates through the years, carrying the voices of those who whisper when the candles burn low. The boy's story, carefully curated by decree and priestly sermon, began to change as it passed from mouth to mouth. In taverns, mothers spoke of strange sounds in the palace, the laughter of a child where no children lived. In the kitchens, Servants claimed to find small footprints in the dust outside the northern corridor, where no one was allowed to walk. And sometimes, late at night, a guard would hear the faint closing of a door that had been sealed since the night of the veil. The regent aged quickly. His once iron posture stooped. His eyes sank deeper into their sockets, ringed with sleeplessness. Though he still ruled with precision and ceremony, those closest to him noticed his growing silence. He began to avoid mirrors. The sight of his reflection unsettled him, for at times he thought he saw not his own face, but another, small, pale, unblinking. The boys. The Queen Mother had long withdrawn from public life. She lived in quiet exile within the palace gardens, walking each dawn along the frozen paths. Some said she had gone mad with grief. Others whispered that her silence was more dangerous than mourning. A single light was always seen in her window at night, flickering against the snow. The servant said she kept the veil there, the same silk that had covered her son's face, folded neatly beside a candle that never burned out. The regent never spoke of her, nor did he visit her chambers. Yet sometimes, as he passed beneath her balcony, he could feel her gaze through the darkness, as sharp and cold as the blade of a dagger never drawn. The kingdom prospered, at least in appearance. Roads were rebuilt, trade flourished, wars were won at the borders. The people praised the regent's governance, calling him the architect of stability. But beneath that surface calm, a hollowness grew, a sense that something sacred had been lost, something that no decree or victory could restore. Each year, on the anniversary of the boy's death, the cathedral bells would toll again. The regent attended every ceremony, his face carved into perfect composure, his hands clasped around a scepter that was never truly his. But when the priest intoned the prayer for the lost king, his pulse quickened. He would glance toward the empty throne draped in black silk, still displayed as a symbol of reverence. And each year, it seemed to him that the silence that followed the final bell lingered a little longer. Not absence, presence. The stillness of something that refused to be forgotten. One winter evening, as the snow fell thick and soundless beyond the stained glass windows, the regent lingered in the throne room after the courtiers had gone. The torches burned low, their light trembling across the cold marble. He stood before the empty throne and reached out, his hand hovering over the armrest where the boy's small fingers had once rested. He whispered, barely audible, "Was it mercy or murder?" The chamber gave no answer, but the silence that met him was not empty. It was listening. And in that silence, he thought he heard a breath. The sound was faint, so faint that at first the regent thought it must be the wind threading through corridors. But then it came again, soft, rhythmic, unmistakably human. Breathing. He froze where he stood, his hand still hovering over the throne's cold surface. Every instinct told him he was alone, that the guards had left hours ago, that no one dared enter this room after dusk. Yet the air had shifted. It was thicker now, weighted with a presence that had no body. He turned, slowly, his gaze sweeping across the vast chamber. Shadows danced upon the walls, the flicker of torchlight bending them into strange, childlike shapes. For a moment, he thought he saw movement near the dais, a small figure at the edge of his vision, white against the darkness. He blinked, and it was gone. Only the draperies stirred. The regent's breath came shallow, uneven. He forced himself to speak, if only to break the silence. "Who's there?" His voice cracked, stripped of its usual authority. It echoed off the marble columns, came back to him sounding foreign, frail. No reply, only that faint breath again, closer now, just behind him. He spun around, but the chamber was empty. The throne gleamed softly in the dim light, the jewels of its crown catching the fire's reflection. And then he noticed it, the crown itself. It was not where it should have been. He had ordered it locked away years ago, entombed with the boy in his gilded coffin. Yet there it sat, placed carefully upon the throne's velvet cushion, as though waiting for its rightful bearer to return. A chill passed through him, deeper than fear, colder than any winter. He stepped forward, one trembling hand reaching toward the object that should not exist. His fingers brushed the edge, and in that instant, he heard it clearly. Laughter, the laughter of a child, light, distant, almost tender. But beneath it ran something else, a grief so pure it twisted the sound into sorrow. It filled the chamber like the tolling of unseen bells, rising, echoing, then vanishing into nothing. The regent staggered back, his hand clutching his chest. The crown fell to the floor, its jewels scattering like tears across the stone. He sank to his knees, his voice breaking. "What do you want from me?" Silence again. Then, faintly, from the shadows near the throne, came the whisper of fabric, the sound of silk moving without touch. The veil. He saw it then, draped across the seat as though newly placed, pristine, untouched by time. It should have been locked away, yet it lay before him, white and perfect beneath the torchlight. He bowed his head. "Forgive me," he whispered, the same words he had spoken years ago in the chamber of death. But now they were not an act of repentance. They were a plea. He stayed there until the torches burned out, the darkness folding around him like a shroud. When the servants found him at dawn, he was still kneeling, his hair turned silver overnight, his eyes open but unfocused, fixed upon the empty throne. He never spoke again. In the months that followed, the regent withdrew entirely from public life. The council ruled in his name, but his voice was never heard. The people began to whisper of a curse, the curse of a child wronged, of innocence betrayed. Some claimed they saw the boy's figure wander in the palace at night, veiled and silent, his small hand brushing the walls as if seeking something he had left behind. The throne remained unclaimed. It stood empty, draped once more in black silk, the echo of its silence more powerful than any ruler's decree. And so the kingdom learned that even the smallest life, when stolen unjustly, leaves a shadow no crown can hide. Long after the regent's death, the tale endured. They called it the Night of the Veil, and they told it not as history, but as warning. For in that story lived the truth that kingdoms try hardest to forget. That power can kill a child, but it can never silence his echo.